I have delved into some different aspects of furry fandom history on this channel, and with all the drama and contention in the fandom in recent times over the existence or concept of anti-furs, I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover and look at that from a different perspective and explore some of that history as well. Now, something that is important to understand from the gate will be some definitions. Despite the current predominant manifestation of anti-furs being people who just run their mouth in comment sections, much like furry fandom, that is just one layer of the onion. The reality is much more nuanced. Now, keep in mind, for a lot of what I'm about to describe, I was not around for, so I'm digging through archives to obtain this information. As far as I can tell, for a long period of time, roughly from 1990 to the early 2010s, anti-furries were in fact furries. If you were an anti-furry, you were a furry, no question, no doubt, but you were simply somebody who was protesting aspects of your fandom. These were commonly referred to as burned furs, and they were still active in the fandom, identified as furries, but had issues with different things in the fandom, whether it be adult content or certain artists they don't like, or things being sold, or conventions, or a whole list of grievances. Some of these older terms included griefer because they had so many grievances. As time went on, and I don't see a definite turning point for this, more individuals started to ally to this cause that were not furries and had not really had any exposure or limited exposure to the fandom. Around this time period, you begin to see reasons given for this behavior ranging from harassment or just trying to get a few people together to laugh at the reaction generated by the drama. This more or less seems to correspond with the era of the lulz and just heavy trolling in general on the internet. The oldest incarnation there seems to be record of was the Save Our Fandom movement, and this was the early to mid 1990s. This was an idea born on the post-bulletin board system internet era, and it's considered to be the earliest incarnation of furry conservatism ideology. Members called themselves the SOF Furs. This particular group, with the help of the early and rapidly growing internet, would eventually coalesce into the very first of many similar groups. This particular group publicly advocated for the removal of perceived fringe elements from the fandom, especially furry lifestylers and gay furries. They also delivered proposals to the heads of early furry conventions about curbing the amount of adult furry art material that was being displayed in the art shows and exhibits. One long-term goal was for the furry fandom itself to return to the, quote, golden age of furrydom, a time that was often joked about by the group's early detractors. SOF quietly disappeared around late 1995. Some of the most radical members used to use the moniker shove-off faggots for their group. Now, a quick side note here. The golden age of furrydom, or the golden era of furry fandom, or another variation of the term, the Renaissance, used frequently by burned furs, is a phrase that was first seen in furry bulletin board systems around 1993, gaining more common usage in the late 1990s, and it was used to describe a purer time in the history of furry fandom where there was less adult material or fringe groups. Initially used by people that had become disenfranchised with the, quote, problem of adult furry art present in the fandom. In August of 1999, we have our next group, Furries Against Animal Sexual Abuse. This was formed to protest any kind of bestiality or zoophilia in furry fandom. Now, on face value, that's a good thing. It's sad that we would even need it, but unfortunately, when going through the archived material, it appears like it very quickly devolved into drama with false accusations being hurled around and people comparing it to the Salem witch trials or McCarthyism. The group disbanded in September of 1999, only about a month later. Our next group to take a look at seems to have generated enough drama to quickly rise to the level of infamous, and it would follow the fandom straight into the new millennium. In mid-1996, the Take Back Our Fandom movement began. It was a furry ideological group mostly rooted in conservative ideals rather than furry hate ones. That came as being a non-intended consequence of the backlash against Richard Chandler's Mass Graves editorial in Gallery number 25. The politics behind the Six Shallow Graves editorial was initially a personal public commentary in February of 1995 between Yarf art director Dave Bryant and fellow artist Joni. Now, Yarf was an early furry anthology. The basic principle grew on the furry alt fan page that I've featured on this channel before, showing some archive chats regarding Chester Ringtail and Terry Smith. Anyway, it was repeatedly raised a valid point or quickly dismissed as a joke until it was picked, reshaped, and published as an editorial in the gallery issue. And essentially what it came down to was a quote where Rich Chandler said, "Frankly, I think it's time we collectively said enough is enough. Things are not going to get better by themselves. Tolerance and political correctness and even manners be damned, we have to reclaim our fandom." The idea was extensively discussed in news groups, generating pro and con camps around the editorial's idea, and quickly became labeled the Take Back Our Fandom Brigade, a title they took on as their identity. Their ideals were almost a duplicate of the early furry ideological group SOF that we cited a minute ago. Recent events fueled their ideology, including some incidents in Conference 8, and the supposed tolerance of the fandom towards fringe elements. As with SOF, this group yearned for the second coming of the golden age of furrydom, even though as with the first group, there were considerable disagreement as to what exactly the golden age had been. The quote that seems to have been behind the Six Graves ideology was delivered by Dave Bryant in February of 1996. Many Fen agree that most of fandom's problems could be solved with 6 shallow graves. Where people differ is who should fill the graves. Now, this next one was a little confusing to sort through at first. Officially, it was the Anti-Wear and Furry Resource Movement, dating from 1998 to February of 2003, founded by a furry named Tiggybot, also known as Bad Tiggy or Lanmaru. Now, as far as I can tell, what they're referring to is essentially therianism, but I'm guessing in that time frame that wasn't really the accepted term for it or the recognizable term for it. It was wear or spiritualism. So, according to the founder, Tiggybot, he said it was a centralized place to study and discuss negative opinions, facts, or whatever of these groups, preferably in a semi-decent, intelligent, or humorous way, created because there was no place to openly expose the flaws and dislikes of these genres or otherwise have fun with them. Now, Tiggy himself was a well-known and liked wear fan in the community starting from 1995 onwards, and ended up being an administrator for many affiliated groups and websites. This apparently changed for him when he began to express personal disenfranchisement with the whole spiritual movement that he felt some therianthropes or furry lifestyles, dragon spiritualists were trying to force on this community. To counter this, he created this AWFR initially to bring a counterpoint to this advent of spiritualism, to also have an alternative to what he called creature culture, and its much expanded follow-up, personal symbolic zoomorphism. His site began to challenge other aspects of furry fandom, including causing some drama with furry fans of dragons, and having resources on his site, including a proposed plan for cleaning up the fandom by cutting back on adult artwork and removing other elements of the fandom to result in the pure fur movement. By the end of the year 2000, updates on the site had pretty much ceased. Tiggybot said he really didn't have anything left to write about, and an outburst by infamous anti-furry Eric Bloomerich, more on him later, would be the catalyst to see the site pulled offline. Of special note here is that Tiggybot seems to be a person in some kind of internal conflict, liking the wear or therian aspect of the fandom, but at the same time being put off by things he sees others doing or portraying it. And of course, this would and continues to be a common theme in these various anti-elements of the fandom. As previously covered on this channel, furry mucks were a place where furries could gather online in an adventure roleplay game type setting, and this was of critical importance in early days of the fandom, where furries could connect through large parts of the country, even in the pre-internet era, as furries were building and developing this infrastructure and would go to great pains to be able to communicate and play around with each other in this forum. The Colmany Pub was a location in the furry muck, and it was themed as a tough waterside tavern, but it consciously bucked the general theme of tolerance elsewhere on the muck. It was significant in the late 1990s as a focal point for anti-furry sentiment. forming a community of disgruntled artists and scathing critics of the fandom at large. Noteworthy early participants were made up of recognizable furries of the time. The pub had amusing features written into its coding, including various creative exits for people to be ejected from the pub, and also trapdoors and things where they would fall into the water below the tavern and things such as that. Another notable feature was the doppelganger. The coders put in an exact copy of the tavern, which enabled the core group to invite people in without having the new invites being part of the real club. Anything said or done in the faux comedy pub was transmitted to the real club as entertainment for the core group. This was really advanced coding and features for its time, but what we notice again is this pattern of furries who are still very active in the furry fandom, but are now identifying themselves as anti-furries, and for whatever personal motivating factor, toying with or stirring up drama with their fellow fandom members. In part 2, we'll see how this began to explode into drama and chaos with the involvement of who is arguably the father of the anti-furries, Eric Blumrich, as the fandom entered the new millennium. Thank you for watching.